Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining the call. Now it's been recorded, the call. I want to introduce you all with our speaker for today, the chairperson for the organization Sudan Advocacy Network Aotearoa, Fatima Sanussi. Welcome, Fatima.
Kia ora. Thank you for having me. Thank you for putting this together. And kia ora to everyone that has joined us. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. To we start, if you could briefly let us know what your organization, Sudan Advocacy Network Aotearoa, does.
Sure. So as you know, I'm Fatima Sanussi. I am Sudanese. The founder and chair of Sudan Advocacy Network Aotearoa, which is a new organization that was established this year in February, following the events that took place last year in Al Fashir, where there was uh, the the civilian impact was so the blood was visible from space. The atrocities that were taking place in Al Fashid that moved um, a group of us Sudanese here to want to create an organization where Sudan does not become a footnote. And because we saw that there was a significant gap between the extraordinary scale of what was happening in Sudan and the level of political and public attention in the crisis around the crisis. And so yeah, it was left out of our discourse in New Zealand and in our media. And often when Sudan was is being highlighted, and particularly at that time last year, where we were moved to create this organization, it was inaccurately framed. So our role with creating Sudan Advocacy Network was to ensure that we can bridge the gap between Sudan and Aotearoa and bring Sudanese perspectives into these conversations, but also with our government, um, parliament, humanitarian organizations, and the wider New Zealand public, not only to challenge the narrative around what's happening in Sudan, but also to get a greater response that actually matches the needs of the people and the situation. So since the inception of Sudan Advocacy Network, we have launched a petition with Action Station, which calls on the Sudan Special Humanitarian Visa Pathway. Um, we've also worked with grassroots organizations. We've met with members of parliament, as well as INFA, and are actively, continually working alongside our allies to bring greater attention to Sudan as well as challenge those narratives.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it.
So fundamentally, our work is about awareness. It's about political action, attention. It's about putting our policymakers here in Aotearoa their responsibility to the people of Sudan, given that it is the largest attack on civilians in our of the 21st century, as well as the largest humanitarian crises of our modern time. So yeah, I hope that answers that.
Absolutely. And before creating this organization last year, I also need to know that Fatima and others have been raising awareness about this conflict for a long time and previous issues that happened in the past. So we were invited by Fatima and others to join their protests and actions, which were widely supported by other organizations as well and groups. And so long term MAGI has been done on raising awareness, which is very important. Just for
Yeah.
people to have the context of what's happening, could you please brief us on how this conflict started in Sudan, please?
So the war began on the 15th of April 2023, and the fighting broke out between the Sudanese armed forces led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the Rapid Support Forces, which is led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, which is widely known as Hemeti, which is a paramilitary force. And so, however, conflicts do not happen in a vacuum. The recent conflict goes back decades. So the RSF actually emerged from the Janjaweed militia, which was known for who were responsible for the 2003-2004 genocide in Darfur. And so the Janjaweed militia, um, who were institutionalized and formalized by the former Umar Bashir regime, which the Sudanese people overthrew during the 2018-19 Sudanese revolution. And so the RSF from its inception was designed to operate outside of the state military apparatus as a parallel coup-proof mechanism. As because Sudan has a history of coups, and so our former dictator Umar Bashir wanted to create a coup-proofing mechanism that operated outside of the state military apparatus. And so, following the RSF being institutionalized and formalized in 2012, after being known for genocidal crimes in Darfur, they also started to operate through military deployments. They had particularly most famously known for during their deployment of troops for the Saudi-led coalition, um, with their involvement in Yemen, and so as well as taking over lucrative control of lucrative gold mines in Darfur. There was particularly in 2017, Amr mines in Darfur. Actually, the RSF, the RSF's control of this lucrative mine made them one of the top players in the gold trade overnight just through looting that mine. And so from the RSF has always operated as a business venture, as a transnational mercenary group. And so um, leading going into 2023 with the power struggle with the SAF and RSF, it was very much due to the fact that the RSF did not want to integrate into the national army, because then again it would take away their commercial interests and their capability to operate as a business venture. And since then, we've seen uh, widespread um, attacks on civilians. We've seen complete destruction of Sudan's infrastructure, as well as an attack on on civilian life. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for providing a chronological briefing on how this conflict started. You noted publicly that people shouldn't label this conflict as a civil war, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's very important not to label it as a civil war, um, because there's essentially this is the largest attack on civilians. It's a war on civilians, and so the civil war narrative exonerates the external patronage that is fueling and sustaining the violence. Particularly exonerates the role of the UAE. where we've seen mounting credible evidence over the last few years that has pointed um, to their integral role in sustaining and financing the RSF militia. It's also very important to note that since the beginning of this war, the attacks on civilians and the total destruction of Sudan's social fabric kind of goes to reiterate how this is a war on Sudanese people. And so, yeah, the Civil War narrative has been really instrumental in kind of in 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 diverting attention from the situation of diverting attention from the realities on the ground, particularly that it's a resource-driven conflict. The Sudan's strategic geostrategic location, gold mines, as well as largest producers in Arabic gum, which is found in a lot of essential products such as pharmaceuticals, beverages. And so, what's happening in Sudan is pretty much the Sudanese people are dying for a wider global war economy that is that has placed capitalist interests before human life.
Thank you. And also there is international interference and influence by different countries on violating the arms embargo in Darfur, and there is not extension yet on the arms embargo in the whole country. Do you have any thoughts on the arms flow that is still happening from different countries?
Yes, it's so even in terms of we've seen like a bit of significant shifts with the recent statement that was put out by Amnesty and um, the International Court of Jurists that explicitly named the UAE as an external actor, supporting the RSF through the flow of arms and sustaining and prolonging the violence. There's also been a strategic shift with European Parliament um, where they've adopted a resolution and have also explicitly named the UAE. But I think these measures, although I will come back to your question, but I just wanted to note that the response around holding UAE accountable has been quite inadequate, and also we have not seen significant we have not seen any kind of significant steps in really applying that pressure. Naming is the bare minimum. To be truthfully honest, naming external actors is really the bare minimum. It's we needed to follow up with political action that actually holds the arms, which is the arms embargo, and also I think also uh, there's uh, also we the with the situation in Sudan in terms of the arms, um, a, a part that's often neglected is also the West's role in also transferring arms to the UAE and the US's role as well. So strengthening that call in terms of ensuring that arms that are exported to the UAE are not re-exported into the RSF's militia's hands.
Thank you. My coworker Margaret just posted in the chat a link to a report from 2024 from Amnesty International called "News Weapons Fueling the Sudan Conflict." Just trigger warning that We are adding links to reports from Amnesty International in the chat. Some of the reports contains very sensitive content on testimonies sharing their stories and the human rights violations with high detail. So I just wanted to mention, give you a trigger warning that to take care when you're reading these reports. Specifically to this report on the 2024 from 2024, Amnesty International research found evidence that there were weapons and military equipment from countries including Russia, China, Turkey, and UAE being imported in large quantities into Sudan, and this is still happening, but also identified, manufactured, and transferred small arms and ammunition from countries from Serbia, Yemen, and China. And our calls on this report were focused on the UN Security Council to take urgent measures to stop the arms flow and protect civilians, and also to expand the arms embargo further than the Darfur and have monitoring and verification mechanisms to make sure it's being respected. But also we call on the states to immediately cease the supply of all arms and ammunition to Sudan. They should comply with international law and oversee the transfer of arms from their territory to Sudan, and make sure that not indirectly or directly are providing arms to RSF and other groups that are supporting them. I wanted to brief that. Also in 2025, there was another research briefing by Amnesty, which I'm going to share the link here, that specifically identified the company Norinco Group from China that was supplying arms to the UAE, and then the UAE was using them in the war, in the conflict in Sudan. Thank you.
Yeah. And also, I think we also saw Canadian armored vehicles on the battlefield that the RSF was using as well. The US, the UN just verified the US's involvement through a military contractor that has been supplying the RSF as well. And there's also, there's been reports also from Australian government sending Australian weaponry actually found on the battleground that was sent to the UAE and then re-exported. So there's yeah, the West is not complicit. Is very very the West is very complicit in Sudan's genocide. And so I think these are although we do have a big focus on the UAE's role, this is all weapons have a manufacturer, the bullets are transactional, and the flow of arms and the armed pipelines are made possible through the support of a wider network. And so it just goes to underscore the profit that's being made off of the war itself, and why we are seeing little attention and growing silence around the situation in Sudan from our international community. Very, yeah.
Thank you. A conflict related to economic interests, but also a war on civilians. And in our research from last year, focus on sexual violence, Amnesty International interviewed testimonies of women and girls from Khartoum that were, they suffer sexual violence, and we realize that the RSF are using this as a weapon of war. The link to this report is in the chat, but again, trigger warning alert that it's very tough report to read. It's the testimonies. There has been last year specifically the RSF have um, um, sorry, the RSF have captured the El Fasher, and there was a long-term conflict, and is still under the occupation of the RSF. Do you have any thoughts on what happened in Al Fasher that actually you mentioned early in the call that made you and your people realize for the humanitarian scale of this conflict and the impact of people that there was a gap in Aotearoa and you wanted to advocate for the people and create the organization formally?
Yes, I think what really captures the situation of Al Fashir. I know I think his name was Nathan Raymond from Yale Humanitarian Lab Research Lab, which released the satellite imagery from Al Fashir that showed the blood visible from space, and Nathaniel Raymond, and Nathaniel did say that the blood visible from space is a result of choice. And so last year when we went out to protest for Al Fashir, and we went out in understanding who the RSF are, what they're capable of, the long history of genocide and widespread atrocities that they have committed in Darfur. And so, for a lot of us Sudanese and Sudanese civil society, understood what was the repercussions of the RSF laying, capturing Al Fashir, as well as what those siege-like conditions would look like. And so, during it was in November last year, where Sudanese we were trying to warn the world that genocide was occurring. The UN identified hallmarks of genocide just this year in February. Um, so I think it kind of goes to reiterate how much Sudanese voices are not being heard in the space, as well as just a persistent pattern of the ignored warnings of um, the risk and impact it will have on civilians. And Al Fashid, particularly, I read the Amnesty report where your Secretary General said that Al Fashid is a stain on human conscience. And so even this year, the MSF released a report in, I believe, in April, where they said that there was no safe place for women in Darfur due to weapon being used as a being used as a weapon of war. And so that is as not an opinion, that is a given fact to this day. Um, we're seeing similar patterns in Al Ubaid where women are being raped, just getting water, fetching water. And so the RSF is notorious for these type of crimes. And so Al Fashir, if anything, really just reiterated to the world how much alone, to us Sudanese, how alone we are in terms of this war, and where importance is placed in the international community in terms of um, trying to put an end to it, and the lack of and even prior to what we saw in Al Fashir, we were already aware of the UAE's involvement. Amnesty had already released a report showing that, detailing that, as well as Sudan's case to the UN, which was dismissed because of a lack of jurisdiction for the UAE to be investigated, not because of the lack of substantial evidence. And so, yeah, it is a war being for against economic interests, and that's what we saw in Al Fashir, when where we told the world who the perpetrators were, who were fueling. Sunnis people have been telling the world who's been fueling the violence, and what that would mean for Sudanese civilians. And it's unfortunate that the world was not able to put in a stop to that.
Thank you, Fatima. The report Fatima mentioned from Amnesty on Al Fashir is in the chat now. So Amnesty International found that RSF actions constitute crimes against humanity of extermination, persecution on the basis of ethnicity and gender, and amount to ethnic cleansing. There were hundreds of thousands of children targeted, displaced. Many were at risk of death and injury during the attacks. People with disabilities, older people also face risks, including being targeted, abandonment, and exclusion from essential assistance. But also, one of the most important groups that have been most impacted are also women who experienced sexual violence, rape as well in Fashir. And also some described that before and during and after giving birth face so many difficulties in the hospitals, but also at home and shelters. So the report is in the chat, and also we can provide a link to the launch report event that our Secretary General went to Kenya to launch it with the researchers and others involved and communities who supported. So basically, in the report, we emphasize that what happened in Al Fashir should be prevented at all costs by states and the UN, UN Human Rights Council and other actors, because there is elevate now being encircled, and we cannot allow that this to happen again. Right now, there has been some time now that RSF are attacking Elevate. And we have recently called Amnesty International to the Human Rights Council to call on RSF and groups to stop the assault, and also states to push for immediate ceasefire, support deployment of international protection force, and also humanitarian assistance, expands arms embargo, condemn the actors fueling this conflict, including the UAE and other countries that are providing arms. I'm going to share the letter here.
And sorry, also I didn't about Al Fashir. I forgot to mention is it's important to note the ethnic cleansing campaigns, and there was African tribes, Sudanese African tribes were targeted because so the RSF militia, known for their they target African, so it's they predominantly Arab nomadic and Arab African nomadic militia, and so their campaigns consist of targeting African tribes. And so for Masalit and Zawaga tribe are the main tribes that were targeted during their campaign in Darfur, in Al Fashir. It's also very important to note that these patterns of attacks on women, cultural erasure, and demographic change is part of a wider expansionist project by the RSF. And following the fall of Al Fashir, they actually declared Darfur as a quasi-state, which is the illegitimate state.
Thank you,
The
Fatima.
legitimate sovereign state, sorry.
We also highlighted what Fatima mentioned, that it has been targeting ethnic cleansing happening in Al Fasher, and targeting of non-Arab communities as well through torture, killings, detention, including women and children. Um, the scale of this conflict has become so big that we are talking about the biggest humanitarian crisis currently happening, with over 10 million of people internally displaced in Sudan, but over 30 million people that require humanitarian assistance. And really, it's not enough on the news. Am I right, Fatima?
Yeah, definitely. We're at 33.7 million people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. To give you an idea of what that would look like, that's pretty much the population of Australia. And so, and I think it's also important to note that half the population are children. So, 17.3 million children are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Um, about 12 million children are outside of school, out of school, have remained out of school. Um, 12 just over 9 million remain internally displaced, and 70% of our health facilities are not functional, as well as there's intense food security with 21 million people, which is nearly half of Sudan's population, that actually face high level acute food security food insecurity, sorry. And so, yeah, the situation, I think it's very important for people to actually, when they speak about Sudan, to actually note that it is the most severe humanitarian crisis. I don't know why Sudan keeps getting, why the narrative, the language is always one of, when it's the most. Um, dire humanitarian crises. And so, yeah, there's also, as well as Yale Humanitarian Lab also released satellite imagery that showed Sudan's showed a sharp collapse of Sudan's breadbasket and an agricultural, sorry, collapse. And so the RSF have systematically destructed irrigation networks, and so the which has triggered like severe costs of food insecurity. And also, it's important to also mention that 755 um, 100,000 people in famine-like conditions, as well as 25.5 million people in need of assistance.
Thank you, Fatima. Definitely, RSF have used as well famine as a weapon of war. Just an
Mhm.
example for El Fasher. So the siege was brutal between May 2024 and October 25. And they
Mhm.
restricted the entry of food and humanitarian supplies, and to the point where people had, they forced people to eat ambas, which is a byproduct of peanut oil production, and normally used to feed animals, really. So
Mhm.
the impact of lack of food in Al Fasher also impacted, as I mentioned before, woman who had given birth. So really, it's the biggest humanitarian crisis currently. Um, we, I wanted to ask you what the New Zealand government really have done so far on this, because this conflict is not new from this year. And what do you
Yeah.
see the New Zealand government doing?
So the New Zealand government, the most recent move from the New Zealand government is they sent a representative to the UN Security Council that actually, in just June this year, that actually the situation in um, raised the situation in Sudan, and the um, and the attacks on critical infrastructure, as well as drone warfare, um, and as well as calling for protection for civilians. They did mention external influences, but they did not explicitly name the UAE, um, which, which is not good enough. As I said earlier, that is the bare minimum of what states can be doing is naming the UAE, naming those that are explicitly actually naming those that are fueling and sustaining the violence, as well as given the fact that UAE are the most the focus on the UAE is it's the RSF's most external backers, and because the interest in prolonging this war is very economic, and experts have pointed towards it being the stability for the RSF, but also in sustaining it, and why it has not come to an end going into 4 years into the war. So, so New Zealand actually signed a finalized their free trade agreement with $1 billion free trade agreement with the UAE last year in August, following after we've already had information of the UAE's role um, with in Sudan's conflict, which goes to show again economic interest being placed above human rights and human lives, and so that I guess kind of goes to show why we are not seeing a response um, that why we're not seeing a response where they explicitly name the UAE. Outside of that, New Zealand has given a humanitarian package of 3.5 million to Sudan just earlier this year, which is great, but we're not trying to um humanitarian support without addressing the factors that are keeping this war intact is not good enough, because we're not trying to manage crisis, we're trying to put it to an end, essentially. And so yeah, it's not $1 billion of trade for the UAE, and while they they're fueling a genocidal militia.
Have you seen any country naming the UAE proactively and really having a better response to the conflict?
Not not really, to be truthfully honest. Only like I said, the significant shift in European Parliament was pretty much the only I think kind of, yeah, the response that we've seen that explicitly names the UAE. That's why it was quite a significant shift in terms of international understanding evolving, um, and also a significant shift in and actually, yeah, highlighting the UAE's role. But no, there hasn't been, and so that's why this war has prolonged through diplomatic cover of the West, and um pretty much, yeah, just the world ignoring the UAE's role and in this conflict.
What would you like New Zealand government to do, and including if you want to mention your call from your petition you have online? Yeah, what would you like New Zealand
I
to do?
think so yeah, so I'll call for as you can see, as you see now, Sudan special humanitarian visa pathway, which is actually the priority of our advocacy priority. And so we have families here in Aotearoa Sudanese families that have direct connections to the situation in Sudan and have their family members in these conflict zones. And so what I think the most New Zealand can has demonstrated previously through Ukraine that it can establish emergency immigration responses. And so that's why we modeled it off the Ukraine special pathway. And so we're hoping to get the same for Sudan, as we're not to take away from the fact that it was rightfully, put together given the situation, but that it only took 3 weeks for our government to respond to Ukraine and establish that pathway. We're going into 4 years of the war in Sudan, and we have not seen a similar pathway for Sudanese communities here. And the impact is very much it's had a heavy toll and impact on Sudanese families that are constantly worrying about their loved ones in these areas. And so even I think it's more accurate to say that Sudan has been um it's I think yeah, even to kind of start this since 2018-19, the revolution time, Sudanese people have been kind of paying the price for this, for the wars, innocent Sudanese civilians. And so, it although the recent war started um, to 2023, the reality is Sudanese people have really been going through it since 2018-19, and that's where I think it's actually since then that we have been trying to find pathways to bring our families into Aotearoa. So that is one very significant thing um, that is a significant move that New Zealand can make in terms of supporting Sudanese families here in Aotearoa. New Zealand needs to explicitly and publicly condemn the UAE. I think that is very important. That is a pivotal step into using their diplomatic influence to hold their trade partners accountable. And another thing that New Zealand can do is review their export systems to make sure no dual um, are getting so that no dual systems are being re-exported from the UAE and supporting the RSF, given the UAE and New Zealand have that relationship. I think it's very integral for also New Zealand to support through have a more stronger presence in um, through multilateral corporations, as well as supporting UN fact-finding missions and documenting the atrocities in Sudan. There's also another thing that New Zealand can do is designate the RSF as a terrorist organization. I think that's very significant push towards actually labeling them for what they are, which we have not seen at all anywhere. So yeah, these are some things that New Zealand can do, as well as upscale humanitarian assistance and ensure that part of that assistance reaches local responders and emergency response rooms, which are often overlooked, although they are the first responders and have been very critical in being the at the front line for Sudanese people at this time while Sudan's critical infrastructure has been destroyed. So yeah, these are some of the things that New Zealand can do in supporting Sudan.
Thank
as
you.
well as strengthening calls for arms embargoes as well, the arms embargo.
Thank you, Fatima. And also, probably some of you know as well that Amnesty International also have a petition, which the link will be in the chat soon, that we are also calling on the New Zealand government to urgently back an immediate, independently verified ceasefire. As Fatima said as well, the need to increase humanitarian funding, urgently review defense exports to the UAE, and halt its arms transfers to the RSF immediately. The UAE needs to halt any arms transfers to the RSF. They also should the New Zealand government call on the United Nations Security Council to extend the arms embargo and support accountability through the ICC and credible evidence collection efforts. And for sure, we also support the New Zealand government to create pathways for people gonna come, needing to come to Aotearoa to do it safely. The link is in the chat. My last question before we go to Q&A: what can people do to support the people of Sudan?
So, what can people do? Honestly, ensure that you're champion Sudanese voices. I think that's one thing that there's, as Sudanese people, we feel very alone. For a lot of us in this space, it does feel like a lot of the times that we're the only ones that are actually trying to advocate for Sudan. So we do need the support in terms of, so if you know any Sudanese, if you know of any um, grassroots organizations, any initiatives, if you have Sudanese friends, or if you see them share information about Sudan, amplify their cause as well as listen to them. Um, Things you can do is Sudan, as I was saying earlier, there needs to be more support to our local responders, our grassroots organizations on the ground and emergency response rooms. So just supporting Sudanese organizations that are doing the Mahi on the ground is very, very integral. Um, Finding Sudanese voices online. There's a lot of Sudanese platforms that are doing incredible work highlighting the developments and the situation in Sudan pretty much every single day. There's a lot of Sudanese-led platforms that are ensuring that Sudan does not get pushed to the margins and uh, um, really vocal about Sudan and how you can support Sudan. So ensuring that you follow those platforms and um, here in Aotearoa particularly, what you can do is sign and share our petition for the special Sudan's humanitarian visa pathway. You can write to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Immigration. You can write to your members of parliament and see how their policies align with Sudan, particularly given that it's election year. So that's very important. Just ensuring that you um, so, keep Sudan visible. Just keep Sudan visible in any space that you can. But yeah, particularly, and I think that's the most. We need to ensure that Sudan does not get pushed to the margins. So supporting credible humanitarian organizations and attending Sudanese led events. We don't have a lot here in Aotearoa. However, there are still groups here in Aotearoa, such as Yalla for Sudan. We have the Sudanese community. And so, there are platforms that you can follow and you can support. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Fatima, for this
No,
conversation.
thank
Thank you
you.
so
And
much.
sorry, can I just say one more last thing that I forgot? Is
Yeah,
please share credible information. Share credible information and challenge misinformation when you see it. When you see a narrative to do with the Civil War narrative, ensure that yeah, just challenge it. Don't be afraid to challenge it, even if you're not Sudanese. Because the framing of what's happening in Sudan is so integral because it's ultimately what pushes political will and action, right? And so keeping we narrowed the framework of how governments respond when we're not accurately framing it. So even if you wanted to write to the Minister of Foreign Affairs or to the Ministry of Minister of Immigration about about the narrative around accurately framing Sudan's war, that would be great. Particularly because a lot of the responses that I've personally seen coming out of our government or from our MP does label the situation in Sudan as a civil war. So that clearly goes to see that lack of understanding, whether it's um, willful ignorance or not. It's still, yeah, it's important for us to continually um, challenge that and ensure that that UAE is not exonerated from that accountability, or any external actors are not exonerated from that accountability. Yeah, thank you.
thank you, Fatima. We are going to stop the recording here and start with the Q&A now. We are
Awesome.